In the last few videos, we have been conducting the CVP analysis, the cost value profit analysis on a single product, which is a photograph. Photograph we were selling at the art festival. We had purchased a photo from a friend who was a photographer, and we were reselling it in an art festival. And we were conducting the CVP analysis to ascertain what our break-even point would be and how many units we would have to sell to earn a profit we would be happy with. In this video, we're going to expand the discussion. Instead of looking at one product, we're going to look at two products. And this is going to make it a lot more realistic because most of the businesses have multiple products. And we're going to look how we conduct CVP analysis when we have more than one product. So we have an original photo, print photo here, which has a sales price of 40, a variable cost of 20, and a contribution margin of 20. And then we have this painting here, which is our other product, and we are able to sell the painting for $100. It costs us 70 to acquire the, and that gives us a contribution margin for the painting of 30. So what we are going to do is we are not going to use the contribution margin for each product individually. Instead, we are going to come up with a weighted average contribution margin for our two products, and you can come up with the weighted average contribution margin for these products for 4 products or for as many products as you like. But just to keep this simple, in this example, we are just looking at 2 products. So let's do this and you'll see how weighted average contribution margin works. So the contribution margin for our print photo is $20 and the contribution margin for our paintings is $30. So just right off the back, we'd rather sell more paintings because it has a higher contribution margin, right? You want to sell that unit that has the highest contribution margin. Now let's look at our sales mix. Our sales mix tells us that the proportion of sales that comes from each product, and we can either estimate that or we can get that from the past experiences. Maybe we sold some paintings and print photos for a while, and we kind of know the sales mix. So let's just say that our sales mix as of right now in our print photos make 75% of our total sales. So 75% of sales are print photos, and maybe that's because the photos are cheaper and they're easier to sell. The other 25% of the sales are these paintings. So we can use this to come up with a weighted average contribution margin. To do that, we'll just take the contribution margin for the print photo of 20 and multiply it by 0.75, and that gives you 15. And then we take the contribution margin of the painting, which is 30, multiplying it by 0.25, and that gives you 7.5. Add the 15 and the 7.5 together and you will get 22.5, and this is our weighted average contribution margin. So now we can use this number to do our CVP analysis. So let's do the CVP analysis with this weighted average contribution margin. Start with our break-even point. How many units do we need to sell to break even? So you guys remember the formula for that. It's just our fixed cost. And let's say in this example, our fixed cost equals $2,000. So our fixed cost divided by our contribution margin per unit, that's what we use when we have one product. But now that we have two products, we are going to use the weighted average contribution margin. I'm abbreviating here. WA is weighted average, CM is contribution margin per unit. So that's going to give us our break-even point in units. And we work this out. Our fixed cost is 2,000 and our weighted average contribution margin per unit is 22.5. And that gives us 88.88, and we can approximately round that off to 89 units because we are not going to have 88.8 units. So we are just going to say 89 units. So we need to sell 89 units to break even. And you are probably asking yourself, that doesn't tell us how many photographs we need to sell versus how many paintings we need to sell, and to calculate that we just need to go back to our sales mix. We want to figure out how many photos we need to sell. Just take the 89 units and multiply by our sales, and we know that photos make 75% of our sales mix, so 89 times 0.75, and that gives you 67 units. So we need 67 photos. And then we go to the paintings. We take the 89 units and multiply that by 0.25. That's the sales mix for the paintings. And you get 22 units. So we need to sell 67 photos and 22 paintings to break even. And that's how we calculate our break even points for the two products. Alright, if you want to find out our expected profit, let's say we'd like to earn a $1,500 profit. So we would like to have a profit equal to 1,500, or we can use our weighted average contribution margin for this as well. We just take the fixed cost plus the profit that we'd like to earn, which in this case is 1,500, and divide it by our weighted average contribution margin per unit. And so in this case, this is going to equal to a fixed cost of 2000 plus our expected profit of 1500, and divided by weighted average contribution margin per unit, which is 22.5. And that gives us 155.55 units, and we go ahead and round that to 156 units. So we need to sell 156 units total to earn a profit of 1500. But again, we got to know how many photos and how many paintings. So we'll just use our sales mix again. So for photos, we take the 156 total, multiply it by 0.75, and that's the sales mix for the photos. And that gives us 117 units for photos. So we need to sell the 117 photos now. And then the paintings, we take the 156 times 0.25 because that's the sales mix for the paintings. And that gives us 39 units of paintings. So we need to sell 117 photos and 39 paintings to get a profit of 1500. Alright, so you can see how this is very similar to the CVP analysis we did when we had one product. The only rogue difference is that instead of using a contribution margin per unit, we are using the weighted average contribution margin. So everything else is exactly the same. Alright, so let's check this expected profit. With the expected profit of 1500, we figured that we need to sell 156 units, so we can check that as follows. We know that our profit is going to equal our sales minus our variable cost minus our fixed cost. And we know sales minus variable cost is equal to the contribution margin. So really, profit equals contribution margin minus fixed cost. So when we figured out to earn $1,500, we need to sell 156 units. We can check that in this formula right here. Our profit is going to be our total contribution margin. So it's going to be 156 units times our weighted average contribution margin per unit, which we calculated as 22.5 minus our fixed cost, which is 2000. And so you work them out here. You're going to get 1510, and the reason we didn't get 1500 exactly is because we rounded some numbers when we were coming up with 156 units. It was actually 155.55. So if you use 155.55, you'd get 1500 exactly. But we rounded to 156, so we get a profit of 1510. But then when you're doing major accounting, we are not worried about being accurate. We just want to get pretty close because we are using this for decision making. So we're going to earn about $1,500 if we sell 156 units. So if we want to increase our profits, but we can't sell more than 156 units, we have to sell 156 as the most units we can sell. And we have several options, right? We could increase the sales prices if we wanted, and maybe that would do it. Two, we could decrease the variable cost. We could cut the cost down, and that might also do it. Or we could decrease the fixed cost. But let's say that we cannot increase our sales price. I mean, maybe let's assume that that's off the table. We think that 156 units can only be sold at the current sales price. So we cannot do anything, not even reduce the sales price. Let's also say that we cannot also decrease our variable costs. We have talked to the guys who we are buying the photographs from and the guy we are buying the paintings from, and they are not willing to sell it at any cheaper rate. So we cannot really decrease our variable cost. Now let's say that we also cannot decrease our fixed cost. We can't go to this festival any cheaper than $2,000, and that's the minimum amount that's gonna take to get us to the festival. So then how do we do this? How do we solve this problem? Now there is only one solution, and that is if we can change our sales mix. So let's look at how this works. Okay, so I have a current sales mix down here, and the print photo makes 75% of our sales, and the painting makes 25% of the sales. But notice between these two items, the painting has a much more higher contribution margin. The contribution margin of the painting is about 30, while the contribution margin of the photo is only 20. So we would rather move this mix around a little bit. We would rather sell more paintings. You always want to sell the item where the contribution margin is the biggest. I mean, that's the rule. It doesn't matter what the sales price of the item is, it matters what the item's contribution margin is. In this case, the highest contribution margin is the painting. So maybe we can alter the sales mix. Maybe we can tell the employees to push the painting a little bit more. Like suppose we were able to change the sales mix such that the photo only makes up 70% of the sales and the painting makes up 30% of the sales. So we sell a few more paintings and a few less photos. So now we take the contribution margin of 20 times 0.7 and you're going to get 14. And as we take the painting 30 times 0.3, you're going to get 9. So that gives us a weighted average contribution margin of 23. We have increased the weighted contribution margin by changing the sales mix, and that's going to increase profit, and I will prove it to you right here. So let's recalculate profit with this new weighted average contribution margin. First, we'll take our total contribution margin, which will be 156 units times our weighted average contribution margin per unit, which is now not 22.5 but rather 23. And then we are going to take out the fixed cost, which is still 2000, and our new profit is $1588. So there's an increased profit. Our profit now is 1558. It was 1510 before, and we did that by just changing the sales mix. That's the only thing we did. And when we change the sales mix, the weighted average contribution margin went from 22.5 to 23, and that gave us an additional profit. So the lesson is, if you want to sell the item that has the highest contribution margin, and it may not be the item that has the highest sales price, in this case it was the painting that had the highest contribution margin. It also had the highest sales price, but that doesn't always have to be true. An item could have a lower sales price but a higher contribution margin, and that's the item you want to push, and that's the item you want to sell, the one with the highest contribution margin. Also, know that the people want to sell you the product that has the highest contribution margin. If you go to a store and the salesperson is telling you to buy this other item that's lower price, you may interpret that hey, the salesman is being really nice to me. They're trying to lean me towards a lower price product, but that product that they are trying to sell to you maybe has a higher contribution margin. So they may be a little devious after all.